I always knew my mother had a soft spot for my younger brother, Ethan, but I never thought she'd take it this far. The call came on a dreary Wednesday morning. I was in the middle of reviewing an important report when my phone buzzed. "Mom," flashed on the screen. A rare occurrence. I hesitated before answering. "Daniel, sweetheart," she began, her voice unnaturally sweet. "I have something to discuss with you." "What's up, Mom?" I asked, already bracing myself. Conversations with her usually meant bad news for me and good news for Ethan. There was a pause. Then she sighed. "I thought it would be best if you heard this from me directly. I've finalized my will." I frowned. "Your will? Mom, you're only 65. "Yes, but you never know what could happen," she replied. "It's best to have these things in order." Something in her tone made my stomach tighten. "Okay, so why are you telling me this now?" Another pause. Then she said it. "I left everything to Ethan." The words hit me like a punch in the gut. "What?" I finally managed to say. "You have a good job, Daniel," she said smoothly. "You don't need the house or any of the money. But Ethan, he's struggling, you know. Life hasn't been easy for him." Struggling? That was one way to describe it. Ethan was a 35-year-old man-child who had never held a steady job, relied on Mom for everything, and burned through every dollar she gave him. Meanwhile, I had worked my way through college, built a career, and never asked for a dime. And now I was being punished for it. I gripped the edge of my desk, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mom, are you seriously telling me that you're giving everything to Ethan? Not even a small share for me?" "Oh, don't be dramatic, Daniel," she chided. "You're not homeless. You don't need it." Need. That word made my blood boil. But I took a slow breath. "Fine," I said. "It's your money. Your house. You can do whatever you want." "That's my Daniel," she said, as if I had just agreed to some minor inconvenience. "You're always so level-headed." I didn't feel level-headed. I felt like I had just been erased. I wish I could say I was surprised. I wish I could pretend this came out of nowhere. But if I was being honest with myself, this had been building for years. Ethan was the golden child. Mom treated him like he was made of glass, fragile, special, in need of constant care. When he failed out of college, it was because the professors didn't understand him. When he quit job after job, it was because his bosses were toxic. When he maxed out credit cards in his 20s and had to move back home, Mom called it a rough patch. Meanwhile, I was the one who had to figure life out on my own. Scholarships, part-time jobs, late-night studying, I worked for everything I had. When I graduated and landed a good job, Mom clapped for me, but she never really seemed to care. Ethan was her baby. And now, she had made it official. For the next few days, I stewed in frustration. I tried to shake it off, but the injustice of it gnawed at me. Then, on Sunday, Mom invited me over for dinner. I almost declined, but something in me wanted to see Ethan's smug face when he inevitably found out I knew. When I arrived, Ethan was already there, sprawled out on the couch like he owned the place. His usual uniform, sweatpants and a faded band t-shirt, was in full display. A beer rested lazily in his hand. "Hey, bro," he drawled, barely glancing at me. I forced a nod and turned to Mom, who was setting the table. "Smells good," I said. "It's your favorite," she said brightly. "Lasagna." I frowned. She never made lasagna for me. It was Ethan's favorite. We sat down, and for a while, it was just normal small talk. Then, halfway through dinner, Ethan leaned back in his chair and grinned. "So, Danny boy, I guess you heard the good news." I set my fork down slowly. "Yeah, I heard." Mom sighed. Ethan, don't be insensitive. What? I mean, it's not like he needed anything from the will. Ethan smirked. It just makes sense. I'm the one who's always been here for Mom. I clenched my jaw. You mean the one who's lived off Mom? His smirk faltered. Hey, that's not fair. What's not fair, I said, is the fact that I've worked my ass off for everything I have, while you've spent your life sitting in this house doing nothing, and now you're being rewarded for it. Mom gasped. Daniel, that's enough. Ethan scoffed. Oh, come on. It's not my fault you decided to be boring and work yourself to death. I actually enjoy life. I wanted to punch him. But instead, I took a deep breath and turned to Mom. Tell me the truth. Why? She shifted uncomfortably. I already explained, Daniel. You're doing well. Ethan. Ethan still needs help. I let out a bitter laugh. He's 35 years old, Mom. When exactly do you think he's going to stand on his own 2 feet? She pursed her lips. You don't understand. No, I said, pushing my chair back, I think I understand perfectly. I grabbed my coat and walked out. And I told myself that I was done. But I wasn't. Because a week later, I found out something that changed everything. I tried to move on. Tried to tell myself it didn't matter. That I didn't need anything from my mother's will. That I had built my life without her help, and I'd keep doing just fine without her money. But the betrayal gnawed at me. Then, about a week later, I got a call from my Aunt Linda. Linda was my dad's sister, and unlike my mother, she had never played favorites. Growing up, she was the only one who ever called out my mom's obvious bias. So when her name popped up on my screen, I had a feeling this wasn't just a casual chat. Hey, Aunt Linda, I answered. Daniel, she said, her voice tight. I need to talk to you. Are you free? Sure. What's up? She hesitated, then sighed. Not over the phone. Can you meet me for coffee? That uneasy feeling in my stomach twisted tighter. Yeah, I said. I'll be there. 20 minutes later, we were sitting across from each other in a quiet cafe. Linda stirred her tea absent-mindedly, her face unreadable. Finally, she looked up. I'm just going to say it, she said. Your mom is lying to you. I frowned. About what? The will. My heart kicked up a beat. What do you mean? She took a deep breath. Your dad had a will too, Daniel. And he didn't leave everything to Ethan. I stared at her. Wait. What? Linda nodded. Your dad knew how your mom was. He knew how she spoiled Ethan, how she always put him first. So before he passed, he made a separate will. One that left half of everything to you. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. But, my mind raced. Then why? Because your mom never filed it. Linda's voice was bitter. She hid it. Pretended it didn't exist. Because if she filed it, she wouldn't have been able to give everything to Ethan. A cold, sharp anger settled in my chest. She stole my inheritance, I said slowly. Linda nodded. Yes. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to steady myself. My mother had lied. She had stolen from me. And Ethan? He probably knew. Hell, he was probably laughing about it behind my back. I looked up at Linda, my pulse pounding. Where's the will now? She gave me a knowing look. That's what we're going to find out. I drove home in a daze, my mind spinning with the weight of what Linda had just told me. My father had left me half of everything. And my mother had stolen it. I couldn't just let this go. But before I did anything reckless, I needed proof. That night, I called Linda again. Aunt Linda, do you know where my dad kept his documents? She sighed. He had a safe in his office, but after he passed, your mother cleared everything out. If the will still exists, it's either with her lawyer, or hidden somewhere in the house. The house. The thought of stepping back into my childhood home after that disastrous dinner made my stomach turn, but if there was a chance the will was still there, I had to try. The next afternoon, I showed up unannounced. Mom answered the door, surprise flashing across her face. Daniel. I wasn't expecting you. I forced a smile. I just wanted to talk. Her expression softened. Oh, sweetheart. I knew you'd come around. She stepped aside. Come in, come in. I walked inside, scanning the house as casually as I could. Nothing had changed, same furniture, same framed family photos. Except, of course, for the fact that the woman standing in front of me had stolen what was rightfully mine. Want some coffee? Mom offered. No, thanks, I said. I actually wanted to take a look at Dad's old office. She froze. His office? Yeah, I said, keeping my voice casual. I was just thinking about him a lot lately. Thought it might be nice to go through some of his things. Something flickered in her eyes, panic, maybe. Oh, honey, she said, forcing a laugh. There's nothing much left in there. I cleared it out after he passed. I'd still like to see it. She hesitated, then finally nodded. All right. But don't be too long, okay? Ethan's coming over soon. Of course he was. I walked down the hall to my father's old office. The second I stepped inside, memories flooded back. The smell of old books, the leather chair he used to sit in, the desk where he spent late nights working. I started searching. Drawers, cabinets, shelves, I went through everything. Bills, tax documents, old letters. But no will. Then I spotted it. The safe. I knelt down, running my fingers along the cool metal. The lock was still intact. If the will was anywhere, it had to be in there. Looking for something? I turned sharply. Ethan stood in the doorway, smirking. I stared at Ethan, my heart pounding. His smirk widened as he leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed like he had just caught me sneaking into his room as kids. What are you doing, Danny? He drawled. I forced a calm expression. Just looking through some of Dad's old things. He scoffed. Uh-huh. And I'm guessing you just happened to be kneeling in front of the safe? I stood up, meeting his gaze. Do you know the combination? Ethan laughed. Why? You think there's some big family secret locked away in there? I didn't answer. His smirk faded slightly, and he stepped into the room, lowering his voice. Look, man. I don't know what Linda's been telling you, but Mom's will is final. I get everything. That's just how it is. I clenched my fists. You mean Dad's will? The one he wrote before he died. The one that actually left half of everything to me. Ethan's face twitched. Just for a second. But I saw it. You're crazy, he said quickly. That will doesn't exist. Are you sure about that? I challenged. Because from where I'm standing, it seems like you and Mom went out of your way to hide it. Ethan's expression darkened. Even if that were true, what are you gonna do about it? I took a step closer. I'm going to find the will. And when I do, I'm taking you and Mom to court. His eyes flickered to the safe. I followed his gaze. And that's when I knew. He wasn't nervous about me being in this office. He was nervous about what was inside that safe. I turned back to him. You know the combination, don't you? Ethan stiffened. That was all the confirmation I needed. Before he could react, I grabbed my phone and took a picture of the safe's serial number. "What the hell are you doing?" he snapped. "Calling a lawyer," I said. "This safe is legally mine. And if there's a document inside that proves you and Mom tampered with Dad's will, you're both screwed." Ethan's jaw clenched. "You really think you're gonna win this?" I pocketed my phone. "I don't think, I know." For the first time, Ethan looked unsure. I turned to leave. "Tell Mom I'll see her in court." And then I walked out. I didn't go straight home. I drove to the only person who could help me now, Linda. She was waiting for me on her porch, a steaming mug of tea in her hands. The second she saw my face, she sighed. "That bad, huh?" I sat down next to her. "Worse. Ethan knows." Linda nodded grimly. "Figures. Did you find anything?" I showed her the photo of the safe's serial number. "The will is in there." "I know it." She studied the picture. "Then we need a lawyer. A good one." Luckily, Linda had connections. Within an hour, we were sitting across from an estate attorney named Mr. Grayson, a no-nonsense man in his 60s who had seen his fair share of family disputes. After I explained everything, he leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen against his desk. "This is serious," he said finally. "If your father's will exists and was deliberately hidden, that's fraud." My stomach twisted. "What can I do?" "You have options. First, we file an emergency court order to prevent your mother from selling or transferring any property. Then, we subpoena her financial records to look for inconsistencies. And, most importantly," he picked up my phone and zoomed in on the serial number of the safe. "We get a locksmith." I exchanged a glance with Linda. "Can we legally open it?" I asked. Mr. Grayson smiled. "If the will proves you're a rightful heir?" "Absolutely." I let out a slow breath. This was happening. For the first time, Ethan and Mom weren't going to get away with it. The next morning, I got a text from Mr. Grayson. "Grayson, locksmith is set for 2 p.m. Meet me there." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. This was it. No more speculation. No more guessing. If the will was inside that safe, everything would change. Linda insisted on coming with me. "You're not doing this alone," she said firmly. We arrived at my mother's house just before 2. Ethan's car was in the driveway. Of course he was here. Mom opened the door, her expression carefully neutral. "Daniel," she said, her voice forced. "I wasn't expecting you." I didn't bother with small talk. "The lawyer's here. And so is the locksmith." Her eyes widened. "What? No. Absolutely not. You have no right." "I do," I interrupted. "The court order was approved this morning. We're opening the safe." Behind me, Grayson held up the paperwork. "You can step aside, Margaret, or you can watch this happen. Your choice." Ethan stormed into the hallway. "This is bullshit." I turned to him, my voice deadly calm. "Then you won't mind us opening it, will you?" He looked at Mom. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything. That's what I thought. The locksmith got to work while we stood in tense silence. The only sound was the soft click and scrape of metal on metal as he picked the lock. Then, click. The safe swung open. My breath caught. Inside were stacks of papers, an old jewelry box, and a thick envelope labeled Last Will and Testament of Robert Miller. My father's real will. Linda let out a shaky breath. "Mr. Grayson stepped forward, carefully pulling it out. "This," he said, looking directly at my mother, "is what you tried to hide." Mom's face drained of color. I grabbed the will and flipped through the pages. And there it was, in my father's own handwriting. I leave my estate to be divided equally between my two sons, Daniel and Ethan Miller. Ethan was frozen. His face contorted in some mix of anger and fear. That's fake. That has to be fake. Grayson shook his head. It's notarized. Witnessed. Legally binding. I turned back to my mother. How long were you planning to keep this from me? Tears welled in her eyes. Daniel, sweetheart, you don't understand. No, I snapped. I do understand. Dad wanted things to be fair. You decided they wouldn't be. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, panic setting in. This doesn't change anything. Mom still has control of the estate. Wrong, Grayson said smoothly. This document supersedes any later modifications. Which means Daniel is entitled to half of everything. Ethan's eyes darkened. You think I'm just gonna let you take what's mine? I took a step forward. It was never yours. Mom clutched Ethan's arm like he was a drowning man. Ethan, honey, we can fight this. Grayson smiled. You can try. But it won't end well for you. Ethan turned back to me, hatred burning in his eyes. You're a selfish bastard, you know that? I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. No, Ethan. I just finally stopped letting you and Mom screw me over. Silence. And for the first time in my life, I knew I had won. By the time we left my mother's house, Ethan was still fuming, pacing the living room like a caged animal. Mom sat on the couch, silent, her head in her hands. I should have felt triumphant. Vindicated. But instead, I just felt tired. Grayson walked me to my car. Now that we have the will, the next step is filing it officially. It's going to take some legal work, but there's no question, you're entitled to half. I nodded. And what happens to my mother and Ethan? Well, Grayson said with a shrug, unless your mother has been spending the estate money, nothing changes, except that now Ethan doesn't get it all. I froze. The thought hadn't even occurred to me. Had Mom already started transferring assets? Had she liquidated anything? Linda must have seen my expression because she muttered, "Oh, hell. We need to check." Grayson nodded. I'll subpoena her financials first thing tomorrow. If she's moved money around, we'll know. I ran a hand over my face. This was turning into a bigger mess than I had imagined. Let's hope she hasn't done anything stupid, I muttered. That hope lasted less than 24 hours. The next morning, I got a call from Grayson. She moved money, he said without preamble. I swore under my breath. How much? Looks like she's been slowly siphoning off funds for the past year. Transferring them into accounts under her name, and Ethan's. The anger I had buried deep inside me ignited. She knew. She knew she was stealing from me, and she had been covering her tracks for months. What do we do? I asked, gripping my phone. We take them to court, Grayson said simply. And we freeze the remaining assets before they can take any more. By noon, Ethan was calling me non-stop. I didn't answer. By 3 p.m., I had a voicemail from Mom, her voice shaking. Daniel, sweetheart, this has all gotten out of hand. We're family. You don't need to bring lawyers into this. Can't we just talk? No, Mom. We couldn't just talk. You didn't want to talk when you wrote me out of the will. You didn't want to talk when you stole from me. Now it was too late. 2 days after we filed the legal motion to freeze the estate, Mom showed up at my doorstep. She looked disheveled, like she hadn't slept in days. Her usually perfect hair was a mess, and her makeup was smudged. But the moment I opened the door, her expression hardened. We need to talk, she said. I crossed my arms. I don't think we do. She let out a dramatic sigh. Daniel, this is your family. How could you do this? Taking us to court? For money? I laughed, actually laughed. I'm taking you to court? Are you serious? You stole my inheritance, Mom. She pressed her lips together. You didn't need it. I felt my jaw clench. That's not your decision to make. She took a deep breath, shifting tactics. Daniel, you're my son. I love you. I was just trying to look out for Ethan. You know how he struggles. I scoffed. Struggles? He's a grown man who refuses to work. That's not struggling, that's lazy. She looked genuinely offended. How dare you say that about your brother? How dare I? I stepped closer, my voice rising. How dare you rewrite Dad's will? How dare you steal from me and pretend like I don't exist? Mom's face twisted in frustration. I did what I had to do. Ethan needed that money more than you did. There it was. The truth. No apology. No regret. Just an excuse. I shook my head. You know what? You and Ethan deserve each other. You deserve to be left with nothing after this. She paled. Daniel. No, I snapped. We're done. And don't bother calling me when you lose in court. I slammed the door in her face. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. I didn't hear from Mom or Ethan for weeks. Not directly, anyway. Instead, I got updates from Aunt Linda and Mr. Grayson as the legal battle unfolded. It was brutal. And, unsurprisingly, it didn't take long to uncover just how deep my mother's deception went. The court's financial investigation confirmed that she had been draining my father's accounts for over a year, shifting assets into Ethan's name while keeping just enough plausible deniability to claim she hadn't known any better. It was an obvious lie. Ethan, of course, tried to play dumb. He acted shocked in court, putting on his best "I'm just an innocent bystander" face, claiming he had no idea about the missing funds. But the paper trail told a different story. Tens of thousands had been transferred to his personal account. Thousands more had gone toward paying off his credit card debt. The best part? He had also used some of the money to lease a brand new luxury car just a month before the lawsuit was filed. The judge was not impressed. In the end, the verdict was clear. My father's original will was legally binding. I was awarded half of the estate, just as he had intended. My mother was guilty of fraudulent concealment. She was ordered to return all missing funds, including the ones she had given to Ethan. Ethan had to sell his car. And his accounts were frozen until he paid back what he had taken. Ethan was furious. He tried to argue, tried to fight, but it was useless. The law was on my side. And Mom? She cried in court, sobbing about how this family was being torn apart and how she had only ever wanted to protect Ethan. But not once, did she ever say the words "I'm sorry." That told me everything I needed to know. After the ruling, I didn't bother sticking around to see the aftermath. I packed up my things, walked out of the courthouse, and never looked back. Aunt Linda caught up with me in the parking lot, a proud smile on her face. Your father would be so damn proud of you, Daniel. I exhaled slowly, letting the weight of it all settle. I hope so. She patted my shoulder. So, what now? I thought about it for a moment. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was fighting for scraps. I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel cheated. I had won. Not just in court, but in life. I move forward, I said simply. Linda smiled. Good answer. That was 6 months ago. Since then, Mom and Ethan have tried to reach out, but I haven't answered a single call. I blocked them both and cut them out of my life for good. From what I've heard, Ethan had to move out of Mom's house because she couldn't afford to support him anymore. He actually had to, get a job. Last I checked, he was working at a car dealership, whining to anyone who would listen about how I ruined his life. Mom, meanwhile, had to sell off some of her assets to cover the court's repayment order. She still has her house, but she's not living in luxury anymore. Do I feel bad? Not in the slightest. Because for once, I got what I deserved. And more importantly, I finally got the peace I never knew I needed. The end.